I'm about to start. Okay. She sat in her command chair, her pearl white dress and pale skin a stark contrast to the minimal lighting of the command center and her raven black hair. Violet eyes peered through the view screen and into the infinite expanse before them. She held ambitions far vaster than the abyss her eyes gazed upon, yet her prize was so relatively small. Simple mission to find and eliminate one person. In an empire of trillions, this one person was perhaps the most difficult to locate and dispatch. She lifted her hand to her face, lace gloves gently brushing her smooth-skinned cheek, and studied the screen in front of her closely. She is only one woman, blood of the first be damned. She tapped a button on the view screen, panned 180 degrees. Now the black expanse was specked with shimmering dots. The scene was overtaken by the wreckage which seemed to float aimlessly. Svanis, what word do you have on the survivors from the battle? Yeah, you heard me pause there? A diminutive creature appeared at her side, almost as if it had been there the entire time. It stood no taller than 120 CILU and was covered in small scales. We have recovered exactly 3 of the escape pods as the mistress has ordered and will be destroying the remaining 435. We have relayed mistress' orders to the Crusaders to perform this task, as she did after the Battle of Rensem. Roth were noble servants, albeit a bit off-putting to most. Svanis was no different. His short body and snake-like skin were one of the reasons Roth were so willing to serve powerful people, protected them from illegal trade and poaching. Losin reached a hand out and gave the Roth a gentle pat on the head. Well done, Svanis. Your ancestor would be proud of your service. She always liked the Roth, especially those that were bonded to her for life like Svanis. They knew their place and never overstepped their bounds. This made them easy to tolerate and even easier to control. When you have recovered the Loyalists, make sure they spend a while on the brig on one of our older cruisers, but bring a few to me. I have other plans for them. If there are any persons of interest, you are to inform me immediately. Do you understand, Worm? Svanis didn't even flinch from her touch, and instead seemed to wish for more. Yes, Honor Mistress, of course. We will do this the right way. Do you require our services for anything else? Illiston didn't answer. She simply turned her full attention back to the view. One of the shimmering dots in the distance became a bright light and then disappeared. She watched a second and then a third. Should have asked for tea. This would be a fine time for a cup of tea. She let out a sigh and pressed a button on her console, moving the view screen to focus instead on her fleet. The Shining Fleet was the most advanced in the Empire. It boasted 5 heavy cruisers, including hers, the Maiden Secret, 14 light cruisers, 4 armored suit carriers, and 16 corvettes, smaller ships designed for carrying men-at-arms. The fleet was a gift to her from Emperor Shasi for her success at the Battle of Rensem, and its first major battle, despite their losses, was a rousing success. Tommy, did the Halcyon escape with the rest of the Loyalist fleet? The black-haired Yen Shaw stood from her console and bowed to Illiston. No, Duchess. Sensors indicate that the Halcyon star-shifted during the battle. We're still not certain where their anchor points were. We just know that while we were destroying the Omnipresent, they managed to slip away. Yes, I am aware that they slipped away. Most of the enemy fleet did, in no small part due to our overconfidence and incompetence. How many of them did we manage to kill today? We're still gathering data, Your Eminence. Preliminary accounts indicate that we destroyed at least 1 heavy cruiser and 4 light cruisers, as well as over 60 Crusaders. We've also implanted spies in at least 4 of the cruisers that escaped. Well done. Illiston opened her mouth to speak again, but was interrupted by a flash to her left. She pressed a button on her console and was greeted by a deep voice. Greetings, High Duchess Raikenos. I have come to give you my report on the Aurelian situation. Ah, yes, Raikasha. Give me a moment, I will take your message in my quarters. There was a slight pause, and then the voice spoke again. As you wish. Illiston rose from her chair, her pearl dress flowing behind her as she moved down the stairs and towards the portal. Tommy, the command of the ship is yours until I return. Do not disturb me unless it is absolutely necessary. She stood next to the portal, and another Roth appeared by her side. To your quarters then, Mistress? Yes, Worm. Be quick about it. I have something waiting for me. Of course, Mistress. As you wish, Mistress. The Roth lifted its arm and tapped it on its nanoband. The color of the portal changed from blue to green. Your ancestors would be proud of your service. She smiled at the Roth, and then stepped through the portal and into her quarters. As she passed through the portal, she reached down and unhooked the skirt from her dress. It fell to the floor, and she stepped out of it, and then sat in front of her communications console. She pressed a button on the console, and Raikasha appeared in front of her, only a hologram, but it still appeared as if it were in the room with her. He did not have the luxury of seeing her in her underleggings. So then, Lieutenant Marshal, tell me how things are going on your backwater project. Raikasha grinned. The hologram's orientation always faced her, so he had no need to turn. Of course, High Duchess. As ordered, I was able to retrieve General Lachine from Aurelia at the request of the Grand Duchy and the Emperor. It would appear that he had some rather pertinent information for us. There were some complications. Illiston let out a sigh let out a sigh as she began to tug at the fingers of her lace gloves. Well then, spit it out. How many people have you managed to kill this time? The Barbary smiled wide, showing off a mouth that was more canine than human. 700. Well, that's not much worse than you usually do. Million. Illuston opened her eyes wide and nearly lost her breath. 700 million? Blood of the First. Marshal, what did you do? I never authorized the use of the OLGA. I did not use the Olga, Duchess. I simply bombarded the planet from orbit. It's a crude way of ridding yourself of vermin, but it worked for what we needed. Illuston wanted to lash out, but bit her tongue. While she was powerful, Raikasha was a favorite of the Emperor, and in some ways he held more power than even she did. She couldn't reprimand him without facing a direct confrontation with the Chasey. That is something she wanted to avoid unless she had very good news. The Emperor was an intimidating man. What exactly does the Empire need with 700 million dead citizens, Raikasha? By this point, she had frantically torn the gloves off of her hands and thrown them across the room. Well, Duchess, I am not privy to the information Ashin has for the Emperor. However, he informed me after a rendezvous that the planet had all but sided with the Loyalists. The last thing we needed was a planet full of sympathizers. Korea has enough safe havens as it is, colonies, rogue planets, and even some official worlds where we don't hold the power we want. It would only seem to make sense, if you would forgive my brashness, to eliminate such a threat now. She couldn't argue with his logic. If the dog had one thing going for him, it was that he was just as cold and calculating as she was. Given the opportunity, she would have come to the same conclusion. It wasn't too different from what she had done during the Battle of Hominin, when she promised the commander of the Omnipresent that she would spare her troops and then killed them. Prisoners took resources to house and feed, and since they were essentially rebels, she decided it was best to execute them for treason rather than waste time caring for them. I will inform the Emperor of this. You have done well. Send Ashin to me on your fastest carrier. I'll be in contact with you soon to give you further orders. Until then, continue to maintain a presence in that system. If there are any other survivors on that planet, loyalists or otherwise, be sure to show them equal treatment. She reached down and began to untie her bodice. Of course, Duchess. I will send the general to you immediately. There was a whimper to his right. Illuston had heard the rumors and considered them as she leaned back in her chair. I hope that isn't one of your subordinates. If it is, you could do me a favor and try not to break this one. Quality officers are getting hard to find these days. You may go. Raikasha audibly growled and turned his attention elsewhere. There was another whimper, and then his image disappeared from her room. As the hologram dissipated, Illuston could only shake her head. Raikasha was famous for his lechery, and because of his position, he was usually allowed to get away with it. The Barbary were not what one would consider gentle lovers, and when they mated with those outside of their own species, or their genetic cousins the Saku, they tended to cause irreparable damage and possibly death. Illuston could barely keep herself from gagging at the thought as she stood up. She let her bodice slip down her body and to the floor, and she stood in only her corset and underleggings. She pressed a button on her console and heard the gentle hiss of her shower activating. Even on a ship like hers, the water usually took a few marks to heat properly, so she used the time to look at herself in the mirror. She was not as tall without her heels, standing only 163 CILU. Her frame was petite, and she found her other features acceptable. She was the envy of most court women and the desire of most men. She had eyes for none of them, and even on Keno she refused to pick a husband. This was why her ship was named the Maiden's Secret. It was a secret she intended to keep for a long time. Illuston stretched and untied the corset, letting herself free from its confines before she pulled off her leggings and stepped into the shower. That's it. It's over.